On Friday, April 2nd, being Good Friday. Oh, it's Good Friday again already. It just feels like it was yesterday. I visited him in the morning as usual, and finding that we insensibly fell into a train of ridicule upon the foibles of one of our friends, Langton. A very worthy man, I, by way of a check, quoted some good admonition from the government of the tongue, that very pious book. It happened also, remarkably enough, that the subject of the sermon preached to us today by Dr. Burrows, the rector of St. Clement Danes, was the certainty that at the last day we must give an account of the deeds done in the body, and amongst various acts of culpability he mentioned evil speaking. As we were moving slowly along in the crowds from church, Johnson jogged my elbow and said, "Did you attend to the sermon?" "Yes, sir," said I. "It was very applicable to us." He, however, stood upon the defensive. "Why, sir, the sense of ridicule is given us, and may be lawfully used. The author of the government of the tongue would have us treat all men alike." In the interval between morning and evening service, Johnson endeavored to employ himself earnestly in devotional exercises, and, as he has mentioned in his prayers and meditations, gave me the Les Penses de Pascal, that I may not interrupt him. I preserve the book with reverence. His presenting it to me is marked upon it with his own hand. It seems like a typo there, but read it again. His presenting it to me is marked upon it with his own hand, and I have found it in it a truly divine unction. We went to church again in the afternoon. On Saturday, April 3rd, I visited him at night, and I found him sitting in Mrs. Williams' room with her and Mauritius Lowe, who he afterwards told me was a natural son of the second Lord Southwell. The table had a singular appearance, being covered with a heterogeneous assemblage of oysters and porter for his company, and tea for himself. I mentioned my having heard an eminent physician, Dr. Heberden, who was himself a Christian, argue in favor of universal toleration and maintain that no man could be hurt by another man's differing from him in opinion. Johnson said, "Sir, you are to a certain degree hurt by knowing that even one man does not believe." On Easter Day, after solemn service at St. Paul's, I dined with him. Mr. Allen, the printer, was also his guest. He was uncommonly silent, and I have not written down anything except a single curious fact which, having the sanction of his inflexible veracity, may be received as a striking instance of human insensibility and inconsideration. As he was passing by a fishmonger who was skinning an eel alive, he heard him curse it because it would not lie still. That's weird. So that's a fact that's something that happened to Johnson. Johnson passed a fishmonger who cursed it because it would not lie still. All right. On Wednesday, April 7th, I dined with Johnson at Sir Joshua Reynolds's. I have not marked what company was there. Johnson harangued upon the qualities of different liquors, and spoke with great contempt of claret as so weak that a man would be drowned by it before it made him drunk. He was persuaded to drink one glass of it, that he might judge, not from recollection, which might be dim, but from immediate sensation. He shook his head and said, poor stuff. No, sir, claret is the liquor for boys, port for men, but he who aspires to be a hero, smiling, must drink brandy. In the first place, the flavor of brandy is most grateful to the palate, and then brandy will do soonest for a man what drinking can do for him. There are indeed few who are able to drink brandy. There is a power rather to be wished from than attained. And yet, proceeded he, as in all pleasure, hope is a considerable part. I know not, but fruition comes too quick by brandy. Florence wine, I think the worst. It is wine only to the eye. It is wine neither while you are drinking it nor after you have drunk it. It neither pleases the taste nor exhilarates the spirits. Hmm. I reminded him how heartily he and I used to drink wine together when we were first acquainted, and how I used to have a headache after sitting up with him. He did not like to have this route called, or perhaps thinking that I boasted improperly, resolved to have a witty stroke at me. Nay, sir, it was not the wine that made your headache, but the sense that I put into it. I said, What, sir? With a smile. What, sir? Will sense make the headache? Johnson said, Yes, sir, with a smile. When it is not used to it. When it is not used to it. No man who has a true relish of pleasantry could be offended at this, especially if Johnson, in a long intimacy, had given him repeated proofs of his regard in good estimation. I used to say that as he had given me £1,000 to praise, he had a good right now and then to take a guinea from me. Oh, I should use that line whenever I'm insulting my friends. I gave you £1,000. I can take a guinea, man. On Thursday, April 8th, I dined with Johnson at Mr. Alan Ramsay's. I'm getting some duo video calls. I wonder if that's some spam thing. On Thursday, April 8th, I dined with Johnson at Mr. Alan Ramsay's with Lord Graham and some other company. We talked of Shakespeare's witches. Well, this should be good. Johnson said, They are beings of his own creation. They are a compound of malignity and meanness without any abilities, and are quite different from the Italian magician. King James said in his Demonology, Magicians command the devils. Witches are their servants. The Italian magicians are elegant beings. Ramsay said, Opera witches, not Drury Lane witches. Drury Lane witches. Johnson observed that abilities might be employed in a narrow sphere, as in getting money, which he said he believed no man could do without vigorous parts, though concentrated to a point. Ramsay said, Yes, like a strong horse in a mill, he pulls better. Lord Graham, while he praised the beauty of Lochleman, on the banks of which is his family seat, complained of the climate and said he could not bear it. Johnson said, Nay, my lord, don't talk so. You may bear it well enough. Your ancestors have borne it more years than I can tell. This was a handsome compliment to the antiquity of the house of Montrose. His lordship told me afterwards that he had only affected to complain to the climate, lest, if he had spoken as favorably of his country as he really thought, Dr. Johnson might have attacked it. Johnson was very courteous to Lady Margaret MacDonald. Madame, said he, when I was in the Isle of Skye, I heard of the people running to take the stones off the road, lest Lady Margaret's horse should stumble. Lord Graham commended Dr. Drummond at Naples as a man of extraordinary talents, and added that he had a great love of liberty. Johnson said, He is young, my lord, looking to his lordship with an arch smile. All boys love liberty, till experience convinces them they are not so fit to govern themselves as they imagine. We are all agreed as to our own liberty. We would have as much of it as we can get, but we are not agreed as to the liberty of others, for in proportion as we take, others must lose. I believe we hardly wish that the mob should have liberty to govern us. When that was the case some time ago, no man was at liberty not to have candles in his window. No man was at liberty not to have candles in his window. Did I read that right? No man was at liberty not to have candles in his windows. Ramsay said, The result is the order is better than confusion. Johnson answered, The result is that order cannot be had but by subordination. On Friday, April 16th, I had been present at the trial of the unfortunate Mr. Hackman, who, in a fit of frantic jealous love, had shot Miss Ray, the favorite of a nobleman, John Montague, 4th Earl of Sandwich. Johnson, in whose company I dined today with some other friends, was much interested in my account of what passed, and particularly with his prayer for the mercy of heaven. He said in a solemn, fervid tone, "I hope he shall find mercy." This day a violent altercation arose between Johnson and Beauclerk, which having made much noise at the time, I think it proper, in order to prevent any future misrepresentation, to give a minute account of it, or a minute account of it, rather. In talking of Hackman, Johnson argued, as Judge Blackstone had done, that his being furnished with 2 pistols was a proof that he meant to shoot 2 persons. Mr. Beauclerk said, "No, for that every wise man who intended to shoot himself took 2 pistols, that he might be sure of doing it at once. Lord Charles Spencer, Cook, shot himself with 1 pistol and lived 10 days in great agony. Mr. Delmas, who loved buttered muffins, but durst not eat them because they disagreed with his stomach, resolved to shoot himself, and then he ate 3 buttered muffins before breakfast, before shooting himself, knowing that he should not be troubled with indigestion. He had 2 charged pistols. One was found lying charged upon the table by him after he had shot himself with the other." Now, I hope you were paying attention to this. This guy killed himself because he loved buttered muffins too much. I'm going to have to look that up. "Well," said Johnson, with an air of triumph, "you see here 1 pistol was sufficient." Beauclerk replied smartly, "Because it happened to kill him." And either then or very little afterwards, being piqued at Johnson's triumphant remark, added, "This is what you don't know, and I do." There was then a cessation of the dispute, and some minutes intervened, during which dinner and the glass went on cheerfully, when Johnson suddenly and abruptly exclaimed, "Mr. Beauclerk, how came you to talk so petulant to me as 'this is what you don't know, but what I know'? One thing I know, which you don't seem to know, is that you are very uncivil." Beauclerk said to this, "Because you began by being uncivil, which you always are." The words in parentheses were, I believe, not heard by Dr. Johnson. That's the part that I said, "which you always are." Keep in mind, Johnson's pretty, is he deaf, or he's pretty blind? I don't know how deaf he is. A little bit deaf. Here again, there was a cessation of arms. Johnson told me that the reason why he waited at first some time without taking any notice of what Mr. Beauclerk said was because he was thinking whether he should resent it. But when he considered that there were present a young lord and an eminent traveler, the Viscount Althorpe and Sir Joseph Banks, 2 men of the world with whom he had never dined before, he was apprehensive that they might think that they had a right to take such liberties with him as Beauclerk did, and therefore resolved he would not let it pass, adding that he would not appear a coward. A little while after this, the conversation turned on the violence of Hackman's temper. Johnson then said, "It was his business to command his temper, as my friend Mr. Beauclerk should have done some time ago." Beauclerk responded to this, "I should learn of you, sir." Johnson answered, "Sir, you have given me opportunities enough of learning when I have been in your company. No man loves to be treated with contempt." Beauclerk, with a polite inclination towards Johnson, said, "Sir, you have known me 20 years, and however I may have treated others, you may be sure I could never treat you with contempt." Johnson answered, "Sir, you have said more than was necessary." Thus it ended. And Beauclerk's couch not having come for him till very late, Dr. Johnson and another gentleman, Stevens, sat with him a long time after the rest of the company were gone, and he and I dined at Beauclerk's on the Saturday se'nnight following. Saturday se'nnight. I think this is a typo. It's spelled SE-NNIGHT. gotta be a typo. I can't believe that would be a word back then. After this tempest had subsided, I recollect the following particulars of his conversation. This is Johnson now. I am always for getting a boy forward in his learning, for that is a sure good. I would let him at first read any English book which happens to engage his attention, because you have done a great deal when you have brought him to have entertainment from a book. He'll get better books afterwards. I'm just thinking about it. In fourth grade, I had this one book, the science fiction book I wanted to read, and they made me read some stupid book instead, and it pissed me off. I'm just stewing about that still. Mallet, I believe, never wrote a single line of his projected life of the Duke of Marlborough. He groped for materials and thought of it till he had exhausted his mind. Thus, it sometimes happens that men entangle themselves in their own schemes. I'm guilty of that. To be contradicted in order to force you to talk is mighty unpleasing. You shine indeed, but it is by being ground. That's a good bon mot. Of a gentleman who made some figure among the literati of his time, Mr. Fitzhibbert, he said, what eminence he had was by a felicity of manner. He had no more learning than what he could not help. Now that's interesting. There was not a footnote there. It says Mr. Fitzhibbert in parentheses rather than a footnote. Weird. On Saturday, April 24th, I dined with Johnson at Mr. Beauclerk's with Sir Joshua Reynolds, Mr. Jones, afterwards Sir Williams, Mr. Lankin, Mr. Stevens, Mr. Paradise, and Dr. Higgins. I mentioned that Mr. Wilkes had attacked Garrick to me as a man who had no friend. I believe he is right, sir. He had friends, but no friend. That's he quotes some Greek here. It says, see anti-page 148, page 946. I'm not going to do that, but I'm just going to assume that. He had friends, but no friends is the translation of these Greek letters. Garrick was so disfused, he had no man to whom he wished to embosom himself. He found people always ready to applaud him, and that always for the same thing. So he saw life with great uniformity. I took upon me for once to fight with Goliath's weapons and play the sophist. Garrick did not need a friend, as he got from everybody all he wanted. What is a friend? One who supports you and comforts you, while others do not. Friendship, you know, sir, is the cordial drop, to make the nauseous draught of life go down. But if the draught be not nauseous, if it be all sweet, there is no occasion for that drop. So that is, I assume, Boswell's response to people shit-talking Garrick here. Johnson said to that, many men would not be content to live so. I hope I should not. They would wish to have an intimate friend with whom they might compare minds and cherish private virtues. One of the company mentioned, is that a bad thing? Oh, okay. So he's saying many men they'd rather have somebody so Johnson's saying, well, I wouldn't want that. I'd rather have somebody who's might compare minds and cherish private virtues. End of discussion. One of the company mentioned Lord Chesterfield as a man who had no friend. Oh, they're still talking people and friends. Sorry. Johnson said, there are more materials to make friendship in Garrick had he not been so diffused. I said, Garrick was pure gold, but beat out to thin leaf. Lord Chesterfield was tinsel. Johnson said, Garrick was a very good man, the cheerfulest man of his age. A decent liver in a profession which is supposed to give indulgence to licentiousness, and a man who gave away freely money acquired by himself. He began the world with great hunger for money, the son of a half-pay officer, bred in a family whose study was to make fourpence do as much as others made fourpence halfpenny do. But when he had got money, He was very liberal. I presume to animadvert on his eulogy on Garrick in his Lives of the Poets. This is Boswell speaking now. You say, sir, his death eclipsed the gaiety of nations. Johnson answered, I could not have said more nor less. It is the truth. Eclipsed, not extinguished. And his death did eclipse. It was like a storm. I said, but why nations? Did his gaiety extend farther than his own nation? Johnson answered, why, sir, some exaggeration must be allowed. Besides, nations may be said, if we allow the Scotch to be a nation, and to have gaiety, which they have not. You are an exception, though. Come, gentlemen, let us candidly admit that there is one Scotchman who is cheerful. Beauclerk said, but he is a very unnatural Scotchman. I, however, continue to think the compliment to Garrick hyperbolically untrue. His acting had ceased some time before his death. At any rate, he had acted in Ireland but a short time, at an early period of his life, and never in Scotland. I objected also to what appears the anticlimax of praise, when contrasted with the preceding panegyric, and diminished the public stock of harmless pleasure. Is not harmless pleasure very tame? Johnson said, nay, sir, harmless pleasure is the highest praise. Pleasure is a word of dubious import. Pleasure is in general dangerous and pernicious to virtue. To be able, therefore, to furnish pleasure that is harmless, pleasure pure and unalloyed, is as great a power as man can possess. This was, perhaps, an ingenious a defense as could be made. Still, however, I was not satisfied. All right. Well, that was a good little section. We had that guy who killed himself because he liked muffins too much, and a little, what do you call it, gangster rap, or what do you call this? The fight between Beauclerk and Johnson. Some bomb mots in there. Not a bad section. Well, until next time, bye from Boswell.